where your passion for sound will last. High fidelity gear and more. Season 11, episode 4. In a world when sound is king, find the tune that makes you sing. Catching waves in perfect stream, where high fidelity meets your dream.
Welcome, friends. I just wanted to let that AI intro song run a little bit more this time because I find it somewhat hilarious. I think it's kind of funny. It's a little bit extra, if you like this, a little bit extra cheese in your intro song than usual. So I thought it's kind of funny. I let it run. You got a little extra nibble of cheese, you could say, this morning. But that is the season 11, episode 4, as you heard in the song. Anyways, on to business real quick. We still have the copper record weight for sale, but also this week, pt.AUDIO launched the gold record weight. So they took the copper and plated it in 24 karat gold. It is for sale on the website. Go to pt.audio, go to the navigation bar, click on About Us, and then the record weight is right underneath that heading. If you would like to support the podcast, the site in true golden fashion with the gold record weight. Now, the official title of this podcast could be, Does Hi-Fi Gear Made for the Asian Markets Have a Unique Sound? I think some of you listening in the US might be like, well, you know, that's not super relevant to me, but I just want to pose kind of like an interesting question. And that comes out of the interview we have this week with Richard Mack, pt.AUDIO writer abroad. Based in Singapore, he says, you know, when he goes to a show, there just aren't that many US-based publications there. It goes largely unnoticed from the US press. The US press doesn't go to the Asian markets, Singapore, Japan, China, Hong Kong, these areas to really report on what's going on there. So I wanted to give you guys, dear listeners, a snapshot of what's going on the other side of the globe. I think we talked a lot about British hi-fi in our earlier series, and we've done a couple of different things, but Richard has a unique perspective into the more Asian markets hi-fi, and I just want to know, like, tell me about it, man. Let's go on a journey and find out about hi-fi in a different part of the world, friends. So without further ado, Richard Mack, pt.AUDIO writer, gives us the download. On with the show. Here we go. Does hi-fi gear made for the Asian markets have a unique sound? Today's episode is brought to you by Focal Name America, a North American distributor. With the collaboration of two industry icons, Focal, the French brand known for high-end audio for home, car, professional, and marine, and Name Audio, the iconic British hi-fi brand. Other brands distributed include Musical Fidelity, Thorens, Avid Hi-Fi, Absolutement, BDI, and Vico Acoustic. Visit FocalNameAmerica.com for your home audio and custom installation needs. This episode of the Occasional Podcast is brought to you by Fernan Roby, a hi-fi designer, manufacturer, and dealer in Richmond, Virginia, where they have been producing heirloom-quality audio equipment and accessories since 2010. Each Fernan Roby piece is meticulously crafted for you to enjoy your favorite music with friends and family. Follow them at Fernan Roby on all social platforms for a behind-the-scenes look at their process, or visit fernandroby.com to see their craftsmanship for yourself. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are with none other than the editor of Analog for Part-Time Audiophile, pt.AUDIO now, Richard Mack. How are you today, brother? All the way over from Singapore on the other side of the world.
I am very happy to be here.
What's going on over there today? What time of the day have we greeted you at? Because it's at 10 a.m. here. What time is it there?
It is 1:18 in Singapore in the morning, but I'm a night owl, so it's no problem. I actually work New York trading hours. Like my work hours are 9 to 4. So
Wow. Thank you very much for joining us at such a late hour for you.
I'm happy to be here.
I was really excited to talk to you because, as listeners know, we've explored British audio, BritFi a bit. We talk all the time about the American culture. We've just basically touched slightly on Germany in terms of audio hi-fi. There's a big wide world out there, and I'm just very interested in how exactly the culture might be a little bit different, because every part of the world has these different root things that have grown in their culture that make them slightly different from others. And I would think some would agree, and I love your input on this too, that the typical sound that ends up at the high end, or maybe at the headphone level too, is not always the same.
No, it is not. It is not.
What is a British sound? What is a German sound? And to kick it off, Richard, please take it away as far as you want to go. Do you think there's a specific Singapore sound that you've ever heard, or do they do stuff differently where you're from right now?
I think there is definitely an Asian sound, not particularly Singapore. And by Asia, I mean, Southeast Asia, as in Hong Kong included, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. Each of these regions have their own specific sound. And I would say Singapore and Hong Kong are closer. And Indonesia and Malaysia, it's a little bit more robust. They have bigger rooms. Singapore and Hong Kong is very similar because very few people have large, houses. Everybody lives in tiny little shoebox apartments. So the sound is a little bit different, right? But I think, just backtrack a little bit, I think like a lot of people do not understand what's happening in Asia. I mean, just the entire economic and demographic shift that has taken place in the last 20 years, the world has never seen before, okay? And let me just backtrack a little bit. Let me give you a little bit of it, like I don't want to talk economics, this is about audio, okay? But it took, US 150 years to get from its GDP from nothing to about, $76,000 GDP per capita, right? Okay. It took Japan 70 years to do that, okay? It took Singapore about 40 years to do that. And it took China 30 years to do that. I mean, the world has never seen the amount of economic growth. And that comes with it. Just to let you know, the per capita income in Singapore is about $92,000 right now, okay? That's actually $10,000 higher than Switzerland. And that's almost double the GDP per capita in Canada. So the spending power here, it's insane. I mean, it's insane. And when you factor in the Indonesia and Malaysia, these two countries are not as developed, okay? So that means the wealth divide it's very, very wide. That means if you're rich, you are filthy rich, and you're poor, you are filthy poor. Indonesia has 280 million people. It's the largest Muslim country in the world. So you can do the math. The top 1%, it's a huge number. And these people are filthy rich, okay? I don't want to sound derogatory or anything, but they are rich. And same in Malaysia, so the top 1% of these two countries, their firepower is equivalent to United States, with the most billionaires. Well, actually, China has the most billionaires in the world. So this spending power in this region, I think the entire world's manufacturing industry and audio are focused in Asia, okay? They're setting these crazy MSRP. Well, guess who are they targeting? I don't think they're targeting the mums and paps, and the average dudes in Canada or US. They are targeting the Asian newly minted billionaires, right? So that's a little bit of the economic backdrop and the market makeup of Asia.
That's a great background. Thank you, by the way. You said something really interesting in that I think this is a global phenomenon, is that the amount of available real estate one has in their room helps shape this overall sound. It's like when we explored British hi-fi, it was the same thing. Smaller rooms gave birth to the popularity of the LS35A, a small speaker traditionally made for broadcast. and it was reflective of the economic status, what was available, the symbol of a culture, right? And so what do you feel like is the essence of the Singapore hi-fi enthusiast? What is the sound that they kind of seek, and how is that different from maybe the US's or other places in the world?
I've thought about this long and hard. There is not just in sound, but the cultural difference between Asia and Europe and America is vastly different. The Western world, the scientific principles of the West, it is being emphasized a lot more. Okay, so when they take a look at audio equipment, it is purely a scientific thing. It is a product that they buy. It has nothing to do with personal development. You wouldn't even understand what I'm talking about when I tell you that audio is a form of personal development. But in the East, because of the cultural background and the cultural roots and the religion that they have, the East almost sees audio as a journey. And you sort of climb up the hierarchy. So in Asia, they have this term called the sifu, or the master. Me being someone, who's an editor of magazines, and I invented the analog magic and all that, so I command a certain amount of respect, but I certainly did not expect that people going around calling me like master. Because in Asia, audio is not just tied to the sound per se. They see this as some sort of a ladder that you need to climb. So that's why when the Western manufacturer go visits the audio customers, the customers don't see them as just, some guy who sells me audio gear. They have a certain amount of reverence and respect, right? Now, Japanese understand this culture. Okay, I just wrote an article on Kondo. Okay, Kondo is sort of like the top of the heap, and the top of the pyramid in Singapore. And when the guys from Kondo, when they speak from someone with not just authority. They are someone with caliber, years of experience. That's why when I talk about Asian audiophile scene, it's not just about the sound. They treat someone who's a young audiophile as someone who's sort of like the first day of learning karate or kung fu or something. You have to learn, and you have to gain respect. You have to gain your knowledge of how to achieve good sound, and they see that as a personal development. I don't know if this sounds crazy to you, but I learned this coming to Asia, because it is purely not just a marketing thing or a transaction. It is a personal development thing. Right? And I'll go back to the sound now. German sound, everybody, almost sometimes, the magazines almost says that, it's very German sounding, right? They associate it with, something with more analytical, right? A little bit more, more boxy, a little bit more edgy sounding, right? And then, at the other end of the spectrum, you have the Kondo or the Shindo sound, which is all about emotions. And all about warmth and musicality and conveying emotions. And Asia has a lot of that. They care a lot about female vocals, whether it's involving emotionally. So they place a very strong emphasis on that. Having said that, that's more in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. When it comes to Indonesia and Malaysia, for some reason, they are about hi-fi sound effects. They are about audiophile demonstration CDs and feel the punch of the bass. So the whole region, it's sort of tied into the cultural roots as well. When you think about Vienna Acoustic, for example, they have a classical music background. So they play classical music particularly well, in my opinion, right? Or you have speakers like Dino Audio or Peak & Salt. Danish sound, they are warmer sounding. Whereas in America, it's more magical. Wilson, rock and roll, punch, right? Big rooms. So Asia, emotions, the mid-range, whether it moves me, that type of, that's a very Asian focus.
Yeah, I had a chance to interview a very talented in-ear monitor designer by the name of Jerry Harvey. He makes in-ear monitors. And he said specifically, I said, what's it like going to a headphone show in Japan? And he was like, dude, they treat me you would maybe say with so much respect, they ask for his signature, like he's
Yes.
famous. And this is noteworthy because he does this all over the U.S. all the time, but it was specifically his time in Japan that he mentioned that he was treated with such reverence and like he would say like a rock and roll star. But yeah, he was treated like a master of his craft, I guess you could say. And that was very surprising for him. It was unique amongst all of his audio shows that he had gone to, which I thought was very noteworthy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a few names that's almost exclusively Asian, by the way. Like, for example, FM Acoustics. You don't even hear this name in North America. They don't even appear in shows. I mean, now that, everybody's amps are $250,000, but when FM came out, they were like stratospheric pricing. FM Acoustic is held, it's almost like holy status, like the highest regard from the designer to when he visits his customers. It's almost like seeing some Lady Gaga or something, it's almost a rock star.
In my experience, running websites, for some reason, outside the US, the number one city for traffic has always been Singapore.
Oh, wow.
And not only is it the heaviest traffic outside of the US, some weeks, some months, it's the number one city for traffic.
Are you talking about part-time audiophile or?
Well, that's a good question because it is a thing for part-time audiophile, but I also run audiohead.com. And Audiohead, it was originally started as a more headphone-focused show. And I, to be honest with you, and I'm a little embarrassed by this, had never heard of Singapore before I started the website. Because I literally was looking at all the cities, and I'm like, what? Where in the world is Singapore? I've never heard of this city, and it's number one for the website. So I thought that was very telling, and also very much why I was interested to talk to you, because I'm assuming, number one, it's because there's a lot of English-speaking people there, and that's why it's part of the list that pops. But maybe there's some more cultural or brand kind of bleed over from America to Singapore, or do you have more of a unique set of brands that are these coveted brands that you were talking about?
Well, I think there are a certain number of names that seem to be more popular in Singapore and Asia in general. So, for example, like FM Acoustics, right? Yeah. It's a big name here. Griffin, it's almost a name that you don't see a lot in America, but Griffin is very big here. CH Precision is making their ways, making their inroads. It's getting very big in Asia. I think their biggest sales is in Korea. Certainly, the second biggest is also like probably an Asian city, and then is United States. So there are certain names that are more popular here than over there. There is also a lot of Japanese, like TAD is very, very popular here. AccuPhase, these are names that you don't see a lot. Luxman is making a huge comeback.
Oh yeah,
in North America, but I think the name is still AccuPhase in Asia. Still AccuPhase in Singapore, right? And of course, none other than Macintosh. Macintosh is always respected and always big in Asia.
I think that in America, Macintosh has its place, but it's almost its own living entity outside of the audiophile. Yes, a lot of audiophiles have it, but it is such like a cultural icon with the blue meters and the green glow that a lot of people have it as a showpiece. I think when they just want to look cool, which is completely a good as reason as any to have it. But yeah, I
actually have a lot of Macintosh at home. I'm one of the few writers. They're actually, my main equipment are all Macintosh. So,
is there anything particular that you could share with us about Japanese? Because you mentioned a lot of Japanese brands, and I think in America here, there's like this niche of American brands. But then there are people who very much love these very specific Japanese brand, and especially when it comes to like the analog sound and turntables, and then obviously phonopre's. And you already mentioned a couple of those brands. In your mind, is the idea of a specific Japanese sound something around the romance and emotion in the mid-range that you were talking about, or does it have its own unique thing?
I think Japan basically has two camps. They used to have three. First of all, they have the sort of the high-end but very electronic mass manufacturing brands such as Luxman, AccuPhase, Pioneer has sort of died off, but there's still Yamaha. There's the mainstream electronics from the 1980s, and these brands are still strong. And I recently did an article on Yamaha, and lo and behold, I have no idea that this company actually makes $2 billion in sales, okay? $2 billion revenue. You know how much Macintosh sells per year? $40 million. And Yamaha sells $2 billion, okay? If you take away the music and all that, and the music, it's still $600 million in sales in electronics alone. And we're talking about amplifiers, CD players, 600 million. I mean, that's a huge number. These are huge companies. That's one end of Japan. And then Japan also has this artisan image of certain brands that all started with Kondo. Okay, they are the first one who came out with sort of this Zen image. These guys are more artisan. They're not scientists. They create products based on their emotions, and they convey emotions. And then there's a whole string of brands that came out after that, sort of airtight, sort of borrowed that image. And Tone Imports in U.S. made a big thing about Shindo, the Shindo sound, sort of like copying that, Kondo image. So that's another spectrum of Japan. Sakuma-san, their direct heated amplifiers. So that's another realm that, sort of Japan dominates that. And also, the other thing is, they also dominate in cartridge making. I think they probably make 80% of the world's phono cartridges. And they're the only ones who are able to market it successfully. I mean, China is starting to copycat, but they're selling on AliExpress. Some of them are actually very high quality, but they still don't know how to market it. So Japan has that world cornered. I mean, if the world is without Japanese, I don't know what's going to happen with the cartridge manufacturing world, because Europe, it's certainly a much smaller share of that, right? So, and then at the far end of the spectrum, you have cheap electronics, and that's being stolen by Samsung and LG. So that's I don't think we need to get into that.
Well, I'm also curious about the relationship and the attitude towards personal audio listening, headphones, because we were talking earlier about smaller space, and one of the directions a budding audiophile can go is to headphones first before they graduate to speakers, if they even graduate at all. And what do you kind of feel like is the attitude towards headphones in Singapore and these different regions that you're familiar with? Because I would say, like in America, there's a little bit of blend between the two, but very, very little. Generally, the two-channel folks, they do just a little bit of headphone listening if they have some like late night thing they want to do or whatever. And it's accepted, but not necessarily really blended together. Now, the headphone community in America is very insular. They stick together quite tightly, and they don't necessarily all consider themselves two-channel audiophiles either. So we have a bit of a separation between the two camps. Now, from what I've heard, and I hope you can shed some light on this, in Japan and other regions where real estate's very small, the artisanal headphone community has exploded, and they're very much embraced this. What has been your experience with the headphone community?
I am praying that headphone will somehow draw more young people to become audiophiles, because as you know, in North America, an article just came out that they predict that in 10 years, half the audiophiles will be gone because there's no new people picking this up, no young people picking this up. And it is happening the same thing in Singapore, Malaysia. I mean, when I go to these shows, it's old people, okay? But with the exception of the headphone section, that's a segment where you can really see some 25-year-old, and they will come. And apparently in China, the homegrown headphone market is huge. I mean, it's massive. And they have a lot of fancy headphones that are like really, really up there with the best. I mean, they look cool. I mean, they have Alien headphones. They have Star Trek headphones. They have all sorts of like homegrown brands. There's probably hundreds of them. Some of them I've never even heard of outside of North America. And that is actually one segment that I am praying to the gods that, you know, it will become a bridge to draw young people in the audio. And in Japan, apparently, they're also having the aging population. I just went to the Tokyo show for the first time, okay, and it is old. I mean, people are, I'd say the average is at least 60 years old and above. And for some reason, headphones brings young people. So, you know, this is across the entire region. It is the only thing that I see young people in. But we certainly need to find a way to bring young people into, you know, high-end audio.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty well-discussed topic about how do we do it, what's actually happening, how long do we have? You know, you mentioned 10 years. I do think that there is going to be a shift. Yes, the headphone thing, I think, obviously, the adaptation with young people, I believe, to be strongly correlated to the use of personal audio gear, listening to you from your phone, and the idea that's kind of really an idea of isolation when you listen, rather than experience it together. I mean, concerts are still a thing, but I think a lot of listening these days gets done on an individual basis that only one person can hear with headphones, and that is part of the adaptation, at least a little bit, to higher end headphones, just an extension of that. But
you can almost tell whether there's a market demand by looking at the products that are coming out. I mean, Audio Technica just came out with this crazy $100,000. It looks like a cash register. It can drive in a regular speaker, but it's a headphone amp, and it is just massive, and it's fantastic. So you see all these products popping out in Asia. That tells you there's a demand for high end. And you know, I'm not a big headphone guy, but when I go to the Singapore show, there is a large section devoted to headphones, like several rooms. And even in when I went to Penang, Malaysia, which is a tiny city, you know, north of Singapore, it's about 1 hour from Singapore. Also, there was a couple of rooms devoted to headphones, and there weren't just 2 to 3 headphones there. There were at least 40 to 50 headphones there. So it is a growing market, and I'm actually happy to see that.
today's episode of the Occasional Podcast is sponsored by Purest Audio Design. Quality audio deserves quality sound, like the purest of diamonds. Purest Audio Design, one of the originals in high-end, just launched their Diamond Revision. With improved metallurgy, flexibility, and enhanced shielding to protect your system from RFI, EMI, interference from noisy wireless devices, the Diamond Revision, just like all of Purest cables, is made right here in the US of A. For over 35 years, Purest Audio Design has passionately made high-end, handcrafted audio cables designed specifically for the needs of your system. They list their specs, such as resistance and shield quality, and you can find them at PuristAudioDesign.com. Purest Audio Design is veteran-owned and available worldwide. Tired of audio reviews that sound like they were written by robots? Us too. For the last 15 years, Part-Time Audiophile has been an open revolt against boring. And this year, we're doubling down. We have a brand new look and a brand new name, but the same old attitude. Find us at pt.AUDIO for all your turntable throwdowns and amplifier face-offs. Great sound meets good times at pt.AUDIO. Do you think that there's any difference in the attitude towards analog playback versus digital in the regions that you visited in Singapore? Do the Americans, I feel like it's kind of become a cool thing to do for young children. Like young women will actually buy it for aesthetic reasons or the tactile feel of it. There's a very strong sense of nostalgia in America associated with that source that digital doesn't really have, right? So like everybody's like, oh, you got a turntable? That's so cool. No one comes to someone's house and sees that they're streaming and say, oh, whoa, that's crazy, because it's become so, commonplace. Is there any type of shift in perception among the places that you visited when it comes to analog and digital? Do they treat them differently, and if so, how?
It's very interesting that you asked me that, because I did 3 years in a row. I did seminars. I did it 2 years in a row in Singapore. I did my turntable setup seminar. And Singapore, I would say, is not there yet compared to Japan and Hong Kong when it comes to analog. I mean, Japan, it's up there. Like when I launched Analog Magic, when I launched my calibration software, I actually launched in Germany and Japan on purpose, because these two countries are leading the world when it comes to analog. And in Japan is widely adopted. A lot of people with turntables. Hong Kong, I would say there's a lot as well. But Singapore, I actually complained that there weren't enough turntables in the last year's audio show. And this year, maybe because of my complaint, I was talking to the organizer of the show, so he brought in a lot more turntable. And I went to Malaysia and Indonesia, there was a drought in analog. I mean, these guys are buying top of the line, clear audio, statement turntable, anything that looks like an oil rig, it's all for Asia's billionaires. And,
they just like the symbolism.
We all know that these oil rigs are unnecessary, okay? And you don't need a $350,000 turntable, okay? I just set up a $275,000 Nagra turntable for someone in Malaysia a few days ago. I mean, just a few weeks ago. And the person has no idea anything about turntable at all. I mean, he doesn't even know how to press the start button almost. But he's buying $275,000 turntable. So you have a niche top 0.01% that are buying all these oil rigs. But the knowledge in analog, very, very low. And also, I went to Penang, Malaysia to do a seminar. Not a single person showed up. Okay, it is the first time in the world. I mean, in US, I usually fill the room. In Toronto, I fill the room. In Singapore, I filled the room. When I went to Malaysia, they don't even show up. And there was only 3 turntables at the show. And also, knowledge on analog, and particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, is a little bit behind in the sense that they don't see it as a scientific thing, that you actually can learn this in a session and you can be someone who can set up a turntable. They, again, going back to that Asian religious thing, personal development thing, they see someone with analog setup skills as some sort of like a karate kung fu master. See it as something mythical, okay? You possess some sort of magic that you can... That's why I call my product Analog Magic, okay? Partly because it's for Asia. So they perceive some sort of you have some magic tricks that you can make the turntable sound good, rather than seeing it as a scientific process. So, analog, there's a lot of room to grow in Asia, and certainly in China is also falling far behind. Again, the billionaires are buying all these oil rigs and, Air Force One or anything that's like $400,000, they want it because they're billionaires. But other than that, the common folk, they're not there yet.
You did say you did a turntable setup thing right here in the middle. I want to throw out a little of a curveball, but if you had to recommend just 2 turntable tips, what would be your top 2 turntable tips for someone just starting out, or like you said, these inexperienced people? What are the top 2 things you'd recommend to do to a turntable if you had one for a beginner, or even a more advanced person?
I would say, number one, you don't need to spend like $50,000, okay? I mean, I just gave a Best Buy award on audio, mono and stereo magazine. I gave it, the Best Buy award to a Yamaha $700 turntable, okay? That thing sounds as good as any $3,000 or $4,000 turntable. And the best part about it is I was shocked to find out how precise the alignment was out of the box. So the cartridge was actually aligned at the factory. And all you have to do is to unbox this, put the needle on, play it, everything works. So I think that's a very good way to get into analog. I mean, you don't need anything crazy. And second of all, start learning how to set up, a cartridge. You need a proper tool to do it. So spend some money. Something that I don't get is, let's go back to the audiophile crowd, okay? A lot of people have $20,000 or $30,000 turntables with cartridge, tone arms, okay? And they will spend $5,000 on some cable, Okay, but they will not even spend $500 on some alignment tractor. I just do not get it. It's almost like having a Ferrari, but you don't know how to drive it. Oh, I have to hire a driver to drive it for me. No, you should learn how to set up the turntable. It is not that difficult to do.
So you did mention that you just got back from the Singapore show. Do you have any general takeaways in terms of what the vibe on that show? You had mentioned some shows you go to are smaller, some bigger. How was the turnout for that, for the Singapore show this year?
The Singapore show is a breath of fresh air. Believe it or not, it's a small city, but they actually have two competing shows, and I go to both of them. So they sort of run within a month or two of each other. The original one is called International Sight and Sound Vision, something like that. And the other one is called Hi in Asia. And Hi in Asia is a new show, and I have to comment that the guy who runs Hi in Asia, his name is Louis Chu. He's done a marvelous job because he knows how to attract young people, and he also, you know, does everything professionally. Signage is excellent. He picks a very nice hotel, and then the best part is he brings in all the popular singers. There is at least 5 to 6 performers, and if you're tired, you go downstairs. There is someone who is from some album that you can buy. Now, a lot of these names I don't know because they're local singers or they're audiophiles from China or Taiwan or wherever. It's sort of like the Jacinta. You know, Jacinta actually came to the show and she was performing, signing as well. So it's wonderful. Like, I haven't been to many shows where there's non-stop live music. And the Singapore one really stand out because of that.
Now, did you have any favorite surprises that peaked out? So a product that was unexpected for you that you heard at the Singapore show that was a really standout, regardless of price, or maybe it was a bargain for whatever reason. What stood out to you?
Totally. And this was actually one of the biggest discovery of my entire audiophile life. Okay. I discovered the Line Magnetic 50 watt SET single-ended amp. Now, this thing sounded amazing. And I mean, literally, I go to so many shows here. I listen to a lot of systems. I mean, I see at least 30 to 50 systems a year. And when you add in the shows, I mean, I see hundreds of systems. This amp really stand out, and it is the only room where I went in and my jaw dropped and I go, wow, this thing sounded amazing. And I actually sat down for 2 hours. And now I actually have the amp in my living room because I asked for a review sample. But let me tell you why I find this amp to be really special. The industry, you know, you have this single-ended crowd. These guys are sort of in their little corners and they're not popular. They don't buy big amps. And they always talk about this single-ended magic, you know. But they're always with tiny little tube amps that are 45 tube, can do maybe 1 watt. You know, the 300B, maybe 5 watts on a good day, or 6 watts if you push it, right? I mean, none of these things can do 20 watts. Now, Kondo one, you know, the Kondo Kagura or whatever, with 211 tubes can pump out, what, 20 watts? But that thing is like 120 grand, okay? I think it's more now. It's like 200 grand or something. So you really don't have the single-ended magic that can drive a big speaker. That is until I discovered the 212 tube, which is a giant tube about this size. I mean, literally, like more than a foot long. And that thing, when you turn it on, it trips my breaker like 3 times already. It actually tripped my breaker so often that I have to replace the breaker. But can you imagine 50 watts of single-ended power? I mean, that is just unheard of. And so you have the power of a very powerful tube amp. Okay, it's still not solid state, but you're getting the top end magic of the single-ended sound from these 300Bs, and it can drive a big ass speaker like mine. I mean, I use a Peak Consult Dragon. I mean, that thing is 1,000 pounds, and this thing can drive it beautifully. So my jaw just dropped. And I'm telling all my audiophile friends and the guys that I chat online, you know, everybody's so excited on Facebook. I'm telling everybody, this is the best sounding amps I ever found, you know. So I'm really excited about this thing. It's called the LM519. It's alignment, and it's not too expensive. I think it's like you can get it for 20 grand or something. And sorry to say, you know, the factory sort of sells all over, so there's a lot of back doors. everywhere on this brand, including like, they sell on their back door on AliExpress or something. So, you can get this thing cheap, and it sounds amazing. And I'm sorry to say, I heard so many, $500,000 systems at the show. This little guy, only 20 grand, sounded the best to my ears, and I'm probably buying one. You can tell I'm excited because I
can tell. I like that endorsement. That's excitement endorsement. I love it. Did you have anything that came out of the show that you consider the best bang for the buck, aside from the amp you just mentioned? Anything on the budget side that kind of really rang out for you that was a great buy?
Well, this was at the Penang show, not at Singapore, okay? But I also gave the Penang show, I gave it the Best Sound the Show award to the speaker, the ATC SEM40. And it's only $6,000 MSRP. I think $6,000 is actually like Singapore dollar. So when you convert it to US, maybe it's even cheaper. And speakers in the $5,000 to $8,000 range is sort of the high-end speaker for the common folk, because not everybody can shell out 200 grand for some Magico or Wilson, right? But at $6,000, this SEM, this ATC speaker sounded fantastic. I mean, these guys have been making speakers for a long time. The ACT house sound doesn't change. So when you buy an ATC speakers from 1995 to the ones that are there now, it sounds almost the same. So it's not one of these brands that comes out with a new model every single year or a new sound every single year. These guys are in the pro audio. They know what they're doing, and I think $6,000 for that speaker is a steal. So I gave it Best Sound the Show, also the best buy.
One of the unique things they do, and I don't know if this specific model does that, but does it have the large mid-section silk dome tweeter on that model?
Yes. There's a nickname for that in Asia. They call it the big belly button. And they actually do. They call it the big belly button. And it does have that, that big, fat, round dome on the speaker. So it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I think they also have an active model, which is double the price, but I don't see the reason for buying the active model because they probably give you like a Class D amp, which is not the highest quality. And you can buy another, you can buy a Purify amplifier for a few $100s, which just gives you 700 watts, and you can drive that thing purely, right? I think it's a hell of a deal.
And then what would you give that amp the best of show, or do you have a room combination that was the best of show for you from the Singapore show? Like what room did the best job?
I am giving the ATC SEM50 and a Line Magnetic the best sound, okay? And they also did the best overall, and they're not crazy expensive. Now this SEM50, I think it's like 40 grand, so it's almost 8 times the price of the next one down. It is a little bit expensive, but overall, I think they sounded the best. And you can also tell, from people talking in the hallway, when you ask a stranger, hey, which room sounded the best? Everybody that I talked to said that room sounded the best. It's not just me. I think a lot of people liked it. Another room that I liked a lot is the TAD, and also it was paired up with it was paired up with TAD electronics. Now TAD is not my sound because I find them to be, I like speakers that are a little bit warmer sounding. I have that Asian thing going on that I need emotions and I need the mid range and all that. The ATC, the TAD doesn't do that very well, but they never promise that. They are a brand that tells you that we are about accuracy, we are about numbers, and we deliver things accurately with no coloration. And I think they did it marvelously. The TAD sound and everything was as claimed and as delivered. That's why I gave them the biggest, big sounding room of the show. It's not something that I like, but it doesn't mean like my subjective is not the market standard. I mean, I'm not preaching what I like here, right? I have to pick the brands that I think has done exceptionally well based on what they promise, and they delivered marvelously.
The grand takeaway from the Singapore show, what would you like people to know about the Singapore show from your experience there this year?
In Asia, everybody knows the show is actually not in Japan, not in Singapore. The show is in Hong Kong. It is the Hong Kong annual AV show. ran by Audio Techniques magazines, Lincoln and Rebecca. They have the crown, and it's very hard to steal that because they have done it very, very well for many, many years. But there is one problem with that. That show is packed, okay? It is so crowded. Like when I go into the rooms, I can't even breathe. So I stopped going to that show because it is just too crowded and there's just not enough space, right? Singapore, on the other hand, is an up-and-coming city, and they're stealing the crown from the entire region. It has the highest per capita income. It is the most clean city in the entire region. Crime is low. Economy is booming. I think people should come to the Singapore show because it will give you a taste of something very different. It is not as crowded as the Hong Kong show. And you fly in, you land in the airport, you can actually be in the show within half an hour. That's how efficient that city is. Besides the completely different vibes you get in the US or Munich, it's a smaller show that has a lot of intimacy because a lot of the dealers and they also play the role of distributor because it's a small country, so they're both distributors and dealers. A lot of mom and pop shops, a lot of brick and mortar shops. So it's very personalized service. It's very warm. It's very friendly, and you don't have 60 people in a room. You have 10 people in a room, and a lot of times you have 2 people in the room, which is why I like the Singapore show so much. Highly recommended.
Anything on the way out here you'd like? This is your first time on the show. You're part of the writing crew, and we greatly appreciate all your coverage of the Singapore show. That coverage is available on the website right now. pt.AUDIO has it all, and I think you wrote some really great stuff. I had a chance to read it, so I appreciate that. Anything you kind of want to touch base with the listeners of the podcast that may aren't be as familiar with you and your work on the website?
I am actually a Western reporter, so I'm probably the only. I think there's a fine gentleman from HiFi Pick that sometimes fly over to the Singapore show, but I think I'm the major like Western media that for the first time. I don't think anybody from Western media has ever covered the Singapore show other than me, and. Wow. So I do get a lot of attention and respect, and I truly appreciate the friendliness and the respectfulness that the Singapore people have given me. But I really enjoy it, and also there's a lot of misconception about Singapore. You mention the word Singapore to any North American, okay? The first thing they're gonna say is, "I don't know anything about this country." "Oh yes, I do." Bubblegum, okay? They're gonna say bubblegum, and they're gonna say that if you spit, they're gonna cane your ass or something, okay? That is absolutely not true, okay? There's this stigma that Singapore, for some reason, it is the strictest country in the world. It is absolutely not true. You can do anything you like in Singapore. I mean, provided you don't take drugs or you don't rob a bank. Other than that, free as a bird. And please come, because it's a great country.
I actually feel embarrassed because I was going to end with that question about the bubblegum because I have not heard. In fact, some of the people did say that visited there, though, they took the gum from them at the airport that they had on them. Is it, maybe not the caning part, but are you allowed to chew gum there now?
You can actually chew it. It's just that by law, they don't sell it. Okay? They don't sell it. So you cannot buy it anywhere. But if you have it, you can chew it, but you just can't spit it out on the ground. If you spit it out, they'll fine you. But provided there's police there, I don't think anybody cares these days. But still, it's like going to Japan. Everybody lines up, so you better line up when you're there, right? So you do things sort of according to their customs. So, I've only been in Singapore for 2 years. I have no problems at all. And I actually love it because, you can walk the back alleys at night. There's no drugs. There's no one, panhandling. There's no one's gonna come up and beat you up or mug you or anything. So it's just wonderful. Right?
Very cool. Very cool. Richard Mack, thank you so much for joining the show. I will look forward to it and check out his writing on pt.audio.com. He's thrown up a great many words on the latest coverage from the Singapore show, and best of luck to you, and thanks again for joining us at such a late hour.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. I hope you have me back some other time.
Love to.
Thank you.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions.
The Occasional Podcast and its original associated music is monitored, mixed, and mastered on the Focal Trio 6 BE studio monitors.
AI songs produced by audio.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.